Hi, and welcome to Scale Model Basics. We've talked about filling gaps in plastic models while you're building them a couple different times in videos before. Today, I'm going to give you 5 tips or tricks that I like to use to fill gaps so that I have to do the least amount of work possible. Number 1, this is what we call the glue and squeeze. So you're going to take your liquid cement, hold the parts together with just a slight gap, apply liquid cement to the gap, let it set for a couple of seconds to give that glue a chance to dissolve the plastic along the edges, and then you're going to squeeze the parts together, hold them that way, and you should see a little bead of liquid plastic come out of that edge. Once the glue is dry, you should be able to feel that ridge of plastic along the seam. Now you can take a sanding stick and just knock that back. And if everything goes as it should, then you will eliminate the seam and file that plastic back flush with the rest of it and have very little seam left that you may need to fill. Number 2, using tape to limit the amount of putty that you're putting along a join. This is very easy to do. Take some tape, apply it just outside of the gap that you were trying to fill, all the way down the side. Press it into place. Take some more tape, place it along the other side of the gap, press it into place. And then you can take your putty. In this case, I'm using Tamiya solvent-based putty. And now you can apply it along the gap, overlapping the tape. You can refine it as much as you want to. Take as much off the tape as you want. Make sure you've got plenty along the gap between the pieces of tape. And then we're going to let that dry for a couple of minutes. This has been sitting up now for about 10 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and peel the tape off. I'll go carefully and slowly. You can see it's just leaving a nice line of the putty there. So now I have this very easy line right down the seam. I'm going to go ahead and let this set up completely. This is a solvent-based putty, so it's going to be several hours before it's hard and good to sand. After that, I'm just going to sand across that seam, and I should end up with the filler exactly where it needs to be. Very easy to clean up. Number 3, bolstering super glue with microballoons. This is really great for filling large gaps that normal super glue just will not quite bridge the gap or give you the strength you need. To do this, I've got a nice gap here that was caused because I got a little carried away cleaning up some knobs. Plastic's kind of soft. Take some super glue. I'm using medium viscosity gap filling super glue. Get it into the gap, and then take your microballoons, in this case rocket powder from Deluxe Materials, and you just need to spray some into the glue. You can tap off the excess, and now you just let that dry. This helps to reinforce the super glue. It's sandable just like super glue is, but it's much stronger. You may need to do more than one application. This will fill gaps up to about 3 millimeters at a time, or in 3 millimeter layers. You can also use it to build up textures or build up profiles. I'm going to let that set for a few minutes, and then I can come back and sand it. So you can see that that is nice and smooth and has filled that gap really well. This sands just like other super glue, and you can polish it smooth like the plastic around it. Now, modelers will use talcum powder or baking powder to do a similar effect, but I've found, and other people have complained, that that can be a little too hard to sand, and that's why microballoons are preferred. Number 4, filling long, slightly wide gaps with styrene strip. So as you can see, we have a reasonable gap along this awkward join here between this engine nacelle and the wing. It's also even wider on the other side. So I'm going to take some thin sheet styrene. I've already cut it to the correct length, and I'm going to apply some liquid cement along the gap. And then I'm going to take the styrene and I'm going to lay it along there, and I'm going to force it into the gap. It may take multiple applications of the glue to soften the styrene, but this thin styrene is very good about taking, responding to the glue. And once it's soft enough, it really is just a matter of pressing it into that gap. It's almost like magic. Now I can just run the tip of my tweezers along there. Don't press into the gap, just press along the gap so that you can get it to conform fairly closely to the side and shape of that seam. I'm going to do the same thing on this other side. It's a little bit fiddly. It does require a little bit of extra work. And, sometimes it turns out that you didn't trim it quite right. It's very easy to cut off the excess. And then you just push it into place like so. And you are pretty good to go. You can fill in any remaining gaps with either water putty or super glue, and you've got those gaps nicely filled. So as you can see, that gap is pretty well filled. There are a couple of small gaps up here where the styrene would not fit, but I can easily fill that with either water-based putty or super glue and shape it. The same thing on the other side. This one has a little bit more of a gap up here, which I could probably go ahead and fill the rest of the way with strip styrene, or take care of it with super glue and water-based putty and then clean the whole thing up. Number 5, reinforcing putty with super glue. Now the thing about either solvent-based or water-based putties is that they can be a little soft, a little grainy, and they may not sand as smooth as the surrounding plastic, which means that the paint may look a little bit different, especially if you're using something very thin or like a metallic coat, which is going to show every imperfection in the surface. So what I like to do is, after I've filled a gap with putty, like the tail section of this plane, I've got some thin super glue. I'm going to take a little bit of it, and I'm just going to run over that area that's been filled with the putty with some of this thin super glue, which will just flow out nicely. And what it means is I can go back over it and sand it, and it will polish it down very smooth, reinforce that putty. So if I have to do things like rescribe a panel line across it or cut through it for some reason, drill a hole through it, it's less likely to chip the way that putties can by themselves. So I'm just going to let that dry for a second. So just like with super glue, I can sand that. It becomes very smooth. It's very tough now. It's ready for paint. So those are my 5 tips for filling gaps on your models. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.